Hello, everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law. I hope you're having a great day, and today we are dealing with press passes at the White House. The United States federal government has press passes for the White House and recently tried to withdraw one of them because of some behavior they found to be inappropriate from a reporter. So, we're going to cover this incident and what happened, and we're going to cover what the White House tried to do about it. Let's get started with this. For over 50 years, the White House press secretary has provided journalists on the White House beat with hard passes, special press credentials that allow on-demand access to the White House complex. So a hard pass is just that you don't have to go through the rigmarole of a security check every time. So you have to go through a much lighter security check. So you don't have to get a special pass, you have a hard pass, a permanent pass. And so that makes it a lot easier to get access to the White House. Until last year, the press secretary had never revoked or even briefly suspended a hard pass-based journalist based on unprofessional conduct at a White House press event. So for 50 years, we have never had to suspend a member of the press corps. Now, query whether or not that's because for 50 years, no member of the press corps has deserved to be suspended, and perhaps maybe they do now. Because some of the stuff the press has been doing is a little bit different in nature for how they treated other past presidents, at least it seems to me. But following an incident at President Trump's 2019 social media summit involving appellee Brian Karem, a hard pass holder, okay, I'm going to just make this clear right now. His name is Brian Karem with an M. However, he's complaining and being a little bit difficult. So I may, from time to time, refer to him as Karen with an N because I think it's funny. But I just want you to know that his name is Karem with an M. All right, let's press on. So Karen over here is a hard pass holder, and Sebastian Gorka, a summit attendee, the press secretary suspended Karen's pass for 30 days on the ground that his conduct violated professional journalistic norms. Karen filed this suit to enjoin enforcement of the suspension, arguing that they violated the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. So Karen over here is pulling a Karen and is complaining about this and all that stuff, and unfortunately, it's going to work. He's going to talk to the manager, and he's actually going to get relief, which is a little bit disappointing, but that's where we are. Welcome to this wonderful world. With one minor adjustment to the injunction scope, we now affirm Karem is likely to succeed on due process claims because, on this record, he lacked a fair notice the White House might punish his purportedly unprofessional conduct by suspending his hard pass for a month. So we didn't have enough notice that we were doing a bad thing, and as a result, that we would not be allowed to continue being a White House reporter. All right. Our court addressed the constitutional protections associated with hard passes in Sherrill versus Knight. That case concerned the journalist Richard Sherrill's application for a hard pass. At the time, no written procedures and no published regulations pertaining to these passes existed. So there was no policy at the time, so we're going to have to create something on the fly. We found the denial of Sherrill's application suspect for several reasons. So although there was no formal policy on this, we think it was a little bit constitutionally suspect. Why? First, noting informed the public or other potential applicants of the basis for exclusion of journalists because the standard for denial of a press pass had never been formally articulated or published. So we're maybe doing something with ad hoc that's a little unfair. Next, the phrase reasons of security was unnecessarily vague and subject to an ambiguous interpretation. And finally, the Secret Service failed to provide Sherrill notice of the factual basis for the denial and an opportunity to rebut. Concluding that the denial violated the First and Fifth Amendments because we violated your freedom of speech and we failed to provide you due process, we order the Secret Service to articulate and publish an explicit and meaningful standard of government denying the press passes for security reasons and afford procedural protections. So we said, look, you can have a policy here, but you actually have to make it clear what are the rules and how do you get them and what procedures are in place and how do you appeal that and all that stuff, because it's governmental action. And so if you're going to open it up to the press, you don't have to, incidentally. If you don't want to have any press, you cannot have press. That's an option. But if you want to have press, then you have to provide rules so that's fair to everybody. So if you don't let anyone in, it's fair. And if you're going to let some people in, it has to be fair on the terms that you're doing it. You can't act arbitrarily. Okay. Although the hard pass system has existed in a similar form for decades, the record before us indicates that, at least prior to 2018, the White House took a seemingly laissez-faire approach to journalist behavior on the White House grounds. As a former White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications, Bill Shrine, explained to hard pass holder Jim Acosta in a 2018 letter, which we shall have more to say about momentarily. Yes, Jim Acosta is coming up and is going to be a central figure of this wonderful story. The White House has never promulgated formal written guidance regulating hard pass holders' conduct at press conferences and events. So yes, so Jim Acosta previously got a letter that said, yes, we never had a policy before because we never needed to have one before. We never need to have one before because journalists behave like journalists. And now they're not. So yes, you're right. We never had a policy before, and now we're going to have to create one. Thanks, Jim Acosta. Way to go. And according to Sam Donaldson, a hard pass holder who covered the White House for 50 years, never did any president or their staff threaten to revoke or suspend his or any other journalist's hard pass because of misconduct that took place during a press conference or other press events until Trump took office. Yeah, again, query whether or not any member of the press misbehaved in a way that should have subjected them to removal. So, yes, for 50 years, this has never happened before. Maybe also for 50 years, the press have been behaving like professionals. And so now maybe that predicate is broken. Maybe the press is not behaving like professionals anymore. So, this hands off approach ended in 2018 following an incident involving Jim Acosta at a presidential press conference. So, Jim Acosta is going to love himself some Jim Acosta. To quote Ben Shapiro, women, find yourself someone who loves you like Jim Acosta loves Jim Acosta. Yeah. So Jim Acosta over here is the straw that broke the camel's back. Because of his behavior, we are going to, for the first time ever, have to create a rule on press behavior. Because up until this point, probably, no member of the press has behaved like a complete douche. But because they are, now we have to invent a rule because of you. So now, yes, we're going to have the Acosta rule because of you, Jim Acosta. That's just great. Let's press on. After asking several questions that elicited no response from President Trump, Acosta refused to immediately yield the microphone. That was a great little incident, yes. Declaring the conduct inappropriate and unprofessional, which, I would tend to agree. The press secretary at the time, Sarah Sanders, revoked Acosta's hard pass that same day because you weren't behaving in a professional way. We were trying to move on and you wouldn't give up the microphone. Like it wasn't your turn anymore. But yeah, so we don't want you to have a hard pass. Acosta filed suit to enjoin the enforcement, arguing that the White House failed to provide a fair notice that unprofessional conduct could result in revocation of a hard pass. The district court preliminary enjoined the suspension, finding Acosta likely to succeed. So again, the problem was that if we are going to issue these things, they provide some sort of right. And that right can be taken away, but we have to provide some kind of process, or at least the clear terms, and we haven't been doing that. So as a result of this, it's like, yeah, you can't do that. You have to create the rules. And then if you want to take away the pass for violating the rules, then yeah, maybe you can do that. But you have to give enough notice of what is okay and what's not okay. Instead of appealing the decision, the White House issued Acosta a letter which purported to convert into rules widely understood practices and norms governing White House press conferences. And we are referring to it as the Acosta letter because, of course, we are. The Acosta letter enumerated several rules governing future press conferences and made clear that failure to abide by these rules may result in suspension or revocation of a hard pass. Central to the issue before us, the letter also stated that a more elaborate set of rules might be devised, including specific provisions for journalists conducting in open areas of the White House, but expressly declined to frame such rules in the hope that professional journalistic norms would suffice to regulate conduct. So the White House issued a memo dealing with formal press conferences. And what they also said is, maybe we'd also have to deal with things that are outside that domain. But we're going to try to believe that you as professionals can constrain yourself. So yes, we will create formal rules for formal press conferences, but we won't create rules for things outside of formal press conferences. And that's going to be the problem here. The White House was hopeful that the press would learn how to constrain themselves without constraints. And no, that didn't happen. So I guess now the White House has to come out with memos that say, okay, here are the rules for basically all of the things, because we have to give you notice because you weren't able to act like professionals. Good times. Okay, so now that we've said what the rules need to be, we need to talk a little bit about the incident in question. So although we didn't give notice, what exactly happened, and are we treating Karem over here fair? So let's talk a little bit more about Karem/Karem and what he did or did not do that led to this place. In 2019, President Trump hosted a social media summit attended by various influential influencers and personalities, including a former presidential advisor, Sebastian Gorkin. At the summit's conclusion, the president delivered prepared remarks in the Rose Garden, which the White House press corps appellee Bryant Karem covered. Like other reporters, Karem listened to the remarks from a roped-off press area that surrounded rows of chairs, while summit attendees, including Gorka, sat. After concluding his remarks, President Trump walked back to the White House, at which point Karem shouted a question to the president, who ignored it and went inside. Several summit attendees, however, reacted to Karem's question. One shouted, "He talked to us, the real news," and another said sarcastically, "Don't be sad, don't be sad." So yeah, the President Trump was calling on some reporters and not others, and Karem tried to shout a question. It's like, yeah, well, he's talking to us. Don't be sad that he wasn't talking to you. You know, a little bit of fighting amongst the ranks here of reporters. Karem smiled, gestured toward the attendees, and declared, "This is a group eager for demonic possession." Although several people laughed, Gorka took it differently. He turned around in his chair and yelled, "And you're a journalist, right?" Making air quotes with his hands. So Karem said, "This is a group that's responsible for once demonic possession," and said, "Oh, you're a journalist," making the air quotes with his hands. So the air quotes have been faithfully reproduced in text. That's good news. As Gorka began to stand, Karem shouted in response, "Hey, come on over here and talk to me, brother, or we can go outside and have a long conversation." While motioning backwards with his right thumb over his shoulder. Gorka then walked briskly to Karem, shouting, "Are you threatening me now in the White House, in the Rose Garden? You're threatening me in the Rose Garden." With two men now standing face to face, Karem, his voice lowered, stated, "I said I'd be happy to talk to you." Gorka, still yelling, responded, "You're a punk. You're not a journalist. You're a punk." Gorka then walked away as he did. Karem twice shouted in his direction, "Go home," and then, "Hey, Gorka, get a job." You know, sometimes I think that high school never really ends. We just moved to different places. Yeah, so these is two professional journalists. It seems very high school-esque, a little high school taunting, a little bit of words insinuation, and all kinds of stuff. And we're saying maybe this is not professional behavior. Maybe it's not. Yeah. 3 weeks later, then Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham notified Karem by letter that because of his conduct at the summit, she had made a preliminary decision to suspend his hard pass for 30 days. Grisham acknowledged that although the White House had issued written rules of conduct governing question and press conferences, it not previously thought to a set of explicit rules was necessary to govern members of the press elsewhere. Yeah, I guess the Trump administration messed up that one, yeah. After a meeting with Karem's counsel to discuss the matter, Grisham notified Karem by letter of the final determination to suspend the hard pass for 30 days. She explained that Karem's demonic possession comment was inappropriate and unprofessional because it denigrated the mental state of the gathered audience, even if, as Karem claimed, it was nothing more than a good-natured exchange. Within days of receiving the final decision, Karem filed this suit against President Trump and Grisham, seeking to enjoin the suspension, both preliminary and permanently, on the grounds that violate the First and Fifth Amendments. Specifically, on the preliminary record before it, the district court concluded that Karem lacked fair notice that his unprofessional conduct could be punished by a 30-day suspension of hard pass because no formal written standards regulated reporters' conduct at non-press conference events. Yeah, the White House messed up by not having formal rules for these situations because they expected the press to be able to take care of themselves, but apparently not so much now. The court rejected the White House's contention that the Acosta letter provided notice, explaining that the letter's language is ambiguous about whether the White House even intends to regulate events other than formal press conferences. Moreover, even if Acosta's letter of professional journalistic norms standard put reporters on notice that certain conduct outside press conferences could be punishable through revocation of a hard pass, the district court concluded that Karem's behavior was not clearly prescribed by the letter's standard or even by a widely understood standard of professionalism or decorum within the context of such an unruly event. Nice. So we've covered this incident in a little bit of detail, what's going on. Now we have to clarify the legal standards. What kind of due process is required for this kind of situation? What is the government required to do? And what are the principles that emerge from that? So let's read a little bit more about the history and legal principles that guide this particular incident that's so wonderful and so entertaining. A fundamental principle in our legal system, the Supreme Court has observed, is that laws which regulate persons or entities must be given fair notice of conduct that is forbidden or required. The elementary notices of fairness, the court explained in BMW, dictate that a person receive fair notice not only that conduct will subject him to punishment, but also the severity of the penalty that may be imposed. This requirement of clarity, essential to protections provided by the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment, is implicated whenever the government imposes a civil penalty. Whenever such penalties threaten to inhibit the exercise of constitutionally protected rights, a more stringent vagueness and fair notice test should apply. So when the government is coming after constitutional rights, in particular, we're concerned that there's fair notice and fair proceedings. So we might be able to have rules, they might be able to be applicable, but we need to make sure that we're not discriminating on unlawful bases so that things can be clear. That essential protection of fair notice applies here. As we explained in Cheryl, the interest of a bona fide Washington correspondent in obtaining a press pass undoubtedly qualifies as a liberty interest, which may not be deprived without due process of law under the Fifth Amendment. And because any deprivation of a protected liberty interest must be effected pursuant to a constitutionally adequate procedure, a duly issued hard pass may not be suspended without due process. Applying the test, we think that Karem's due process claim is likely to succeed because, on this record, nothing put him on notice about the magnitude of the sanction, a month-long loss of his access, an eon in today's news business. The White House might impose for purportedly unprofessional conduct at a non-press conference event. True, Acosta's letter set forth rules governing future press conferences, but that very same letter, the White House expressly declined to adopt specific provisions for journalists conducted in open areas of the White House, in the hope that the professional journalistic norms would be sufficient to regulate conduct in those places. Apparently, no. Even assuming the Acosta letter provided Karem some notice of behavioral expectations in the open areas of the White House, it failed to put him on notice of the magnitude of the sanction the White House might impose. Here, the law expressed prior to Karem's conduct failed to put him on notice that he could elude his hard pass for a month. As explained above, the White House had not previously thought that a set of explicit rules was necessary to govern the behavior by members of the White House press corps, nor had it ever revoked the hard pass for ostensibly unprofessional conduct outside press conferences, despite evidence that the White House press events were often freewheeling affairs where aggressive conduct had long been tolerated without punishment. In any event, the White House can rest assured that principles of due process do not limit the authority to maintain order and decorum at the White House events. For example, ordering the immediate removal of rogue, mooning journalists. I do love that phrase mooning here because it's so deceptive. Because earlier in the opinion, the White House said, "What about people who howl at the moon as like a werewolf? Could we do that?" So mooning here does not mean pulling down your pants. Mooning here means howling at the moon, but the court is not going to differentiate it because the court doesn't want to, I guess. So here by mooning we mean howling at the moon as a crazy person, not mooning as in pulling down your pants, but okay, court. Yeah, we picked up what you're putting down. We know what you're talking about. Yeah. We hold only that to punish Karem, the second Karem letter, the White House was required to provide fair notice of the magnitude of the sanction that might be imposed. As the Acosta letter recognizes, the White House may promulgate the sanctions anytime it wishes, but until then, due process precludes the White House from punishing Karem or Karen as it did here. Yeah, nice. So that is the end of the case of the hard pass in the case of Brian Karem versus Donald Trump. In this case, the White House revoked a hard pass of a reporter named Karem because of some behavior in the White House that was questionable. But the Court of Appeals says, well, you didn't give proper notice and proper due process, and you're required to do that. So I suppose the White House is now in the task of actually promulgating rules because adults can't behave like adults. And they have to actually be told, you have to give up the mic when it's not your turn. You can't shout down others and insult things. So yes, they actually have to promulgate formal rules or something. Or not formal rules because of the Supreme Court's recent decision. Maybe a cocktail napkin will do. So maybe the Supreme Court will do it on the back of a cocktail napkin, and we'll see if that will be upheld. But until then, we will have to make do with this case. So that is the end of the coverage of this current case.